Hi, this is David. Thank you for joining us for our Colossians study. If you didn't see the intro, you can go ahead and get that online. But today we're going to get right into it and go into Colossians 1:1 because I did promise that I was going to try to keep these to 5 minutes. So today, Colossians 1:1 says, Paul, an apostle of Jesus Christ by the will of God, and Timothy, our brother. That's coming from my NASB on my phone here. And basically we see here that Paul starts the letter to the Colossians the same way he starts most of his letters, which is with a greeting. And that greeting usually starts with who is writing this letter. So we see here that Paul is writing this letter. Now, Paul actually isn't the person who's actually writing this letter, literally, physically, because Paul probably has a secretary doing this for him. We recognize that because at the end of this letter, in chapter 4, we see that at the very end he says, and I, Paul, write this with my own hand. In other words, it's kind of like his signature. It's his sign, it's his seal that's saying, yeah, I didn't write the rest of this, but this is from me. Here's my signature to prove it. So we see that Paul probably used a secretary. They call him an amanuensis. But we have Paul using a secretary to write this letter. But it is from Paul, and we recognize that because he did sign off at the end. So Paul has written this, and he calls himself an apostle of Jesus Christ. That's important as well. Why? Because, well, number one, Paul has had to fight for his apostleship throughout his life. And oftentimes, we see in some of the other letters that he wrote, he's had to defend his apostleship. And half of 2 Corinthians is him saying, I am an apostle, right? So we see that. However, that's actually what's not going on here. Paul doesn't necessarily have to defend his apostleship to the Colossians because they understand that he is an apostle. They've heard of the apostle Paul through Epaphras, who created the church here in Colossae. So they trust Paul, they know who he is, but yet Paul still mentions that he's an apostle of Jesus Christ. So why does he do that? And the reason he does that is because he wants them to know that he's coming to them, that he's writing this letter, not of his own accord, not from his own power or from his own authority, but he's writing it from the authority of Jesus Christ. That's very important because if these are Paul's words, then the false teachers could be true. They can be right. It might be that Paul isn't right about these things. However, if these are actually Paul's words, but they're coming from Jesus Christ, now there's an authority behind that, and they have to take that for real. I'll give you an example. If I was working with a couple of people, and I said to those people, hey, we're all going to meet in the meeting room at 2 o'clock, they might say, who are you to tell us when to meet and where to meet? We're busy. We got other things to do. But if the boss came up to me earlier and said, David, tell everybody to meet in the meeting room at 2 o'clock, and then I went to everybody and said, hey, the boss said everybody needs to meet in the meeting room at 2 o'clock, everybody's going to go into the meeting room at 2 o'clock. And that makes sense because I'm not speaking from David. That was the first time, and nobody's going to listen to that. But I'm speaking from the boss. And everybody needs to listen to that. And so Paul is saying, I am an apostle of Jesus Christ. And what he's basically saying is, I'm coming to you by the authority of Jesus Christ. And so you need to listen to what I'm about to say here. So he's coming with the authority of Jesus Christ. He's an apostle of Jesus Christ. It also says that he's an apostle of Jesus Christ by the will of God. That's tremendously important because how many times do we know, have we experienced pastors who really have not come to us by the will of God? There are a lot of people who think they should be pastors or think they should be leaders or think they should be teachers, but they're doing it in their own power. They're doing it by their own will. They're not sent by God. And so Paul is pointing out, I'm not coming to you on my own power. I'm not coming to you in my own will. I'm coming to you by the will of God, the Father. So we see that Paul is saying, I'm writing this in the authority of Jesus. I'm coming to you by the will of God, by his power. And then finally he says that he's not alone. He's with Timothy, our brother. Now Timothy's been with Paul throughout his entire second missionary journey, throughout his entire third missionary journey. Paul really sees Timothy as a son. He's a disciple of Paul's. And we see that when we see Paul's letters to Timothy in 1st and 2nd Timothy. Those are letters written to this same Timothy. So we recognize throughout the book of Acts and through those letters that Paul and Timothy have this relationship. Because remember, Paul is in prison as he's writing this, and Timothy's with him. Timothy is actually mentioned in 2 of the other prison epistles. So Timothy is there with Paul as he does these things. So that's who's writing it, is Paul and Timothy. And some people think Timothy might have been the secretary, the amanuensis. We don't know that, but just throwing it out there so you've heard that. So that's it. That finishes our study for today. We'll go into verse 2 tomorrow. Thank you very much for being with me today. God bless.